Welcome to the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. So we're going through this whole exercise again, and it feels like the 563rd time in recent years, but in reality, it's really only the second time in 2 months. I'm referring, of course, to not so much to the partial cancellation of a English raconteur, but rather the reaction of the people on the right, whether it's the Gab alt-right, whether it's the community, whether it's conservatives and the mainstream conservative media and so forth. But what I find intriguing is not so much that there's some level of interest in the stuff. I mean, by definition, people are interested in celebrities. They pay attention to celebrities. The sports guy in his book, The Book of Basketball, talks about how on nights that the Chicago Bulls were playing in someone else's stadium, someone else's arena, that there was a palpable air of electricity in the air. He said all the women looked like they'd taken an extra 10 minutes to get ready, and all the guys, especially those in the good seats, kind of carry themselves with their chest puffed out, saying, clearly I am an important man because I am at this important event. And it was really all because of one man. It was all because of one celebrity. In that case, it was Michael Jordan. His presence made it an event. It was similar in Minnesota during the Prince years. If Prince happened to show up at the perimeter, show up at the fine line, the entire place knew it within a relatively short period of time. Now, of course, it was Minnesota, so it was different. Everyone assiduously avoided looking at him directly or going up and talking to him because the social norms are different there. But the point is that it's natural for there to be a level of interest in celebrity. That's why they exist. But what doesn't make much sense is people getting excited about them or getting emotionally wrapped up in defending them when people quite reasonably point out, hey, just because this guy happened to say one or two things that you approve of does not mean that he's on your side. And of course, as conservatives always need to be reminded, just because he's someone who is different than the conservative demographic norm, that does not mean that you should immediately attempt to make him the leader of your movement. It does not mean that you should immediately look to him for all your opinions. Now, I haven't paid any attention to Russell Brand. I mean, and when I say any attention, I mean, I have absolutely no idea what Russell Brand has been doing for probably 12 years. The only reason I barely knew a bit about him was because, back before he had married Katy Perry, he'd been pretty active on the British talk show circuit. So occasionally he would make the news. Um, in fact, the thing he was most famous for in England was having said some very foul things on the air with Jonathan Ross, the talk show host, about a well-known gentleman's granddaughter. It was for England, it was a big scandal. Um, no one would have even noticed this in the States, but it was a very English sort of scandal. Um, 3-7 says, don't watch him, but not going to help the left cancel him. How are you going to help the left cancel him? If you were already not watching him, if you were already not supporting him or a fan, then what are you going to do? Go and stand with him against the left? He is the left. He's one of them. See, there's two things here that a lot of, I don't know what the right word is, the naivete or the innocence or the retardery of the right. First of all, Brand is not canceled. He's not canceled at all. What has actually happened? He got demonetized by a single platform. He didn't even get kicked off it. I can't log in to my YouTube account. It's still there, but I can't get into it. In fact, I can't even log in to watch a YouTube video. Big Bear's completely axed. Stefan Molyneux, other people. Now, why didn't anybody, other than our hardcore fans and supporters, why didn't anybody say a single word about that? I'm still banned from Twitter, or if you prefer, X. After Elon Musk announced that everybody was going to be allowed and they were going to be the freest of all free speech platforms, etc., I said, great. And I sent them an email. And not 12 hours later, an email came back and said, you will never, this account will never be unsuspended. You know, you may have forgotten, but during the James Damore case, it came out that I'm not even permitted to set foot on Google's Mountain View campus. Now, this is crazy. I moved out of the United States before Google was even founded. I have never, even when I was back in the game industry, even when I was regularly going out to the Bay Area working with various game companies, working with companies like Intel and Creative Labs, even though my father's company was very closely tied with Autodesk, I've never even been, to the best of my recollection, to Mountain View. I've driven past it. Now that's getting canceled. Where's the outrage? Why are you concerned about somebody who doesn't care at all about Russell Brand, who doesn't watch him, why are you determined to not help the left cancel him, but so few people other than, basically very few people outside of the VFM, the Dread Ilk, and the Ilk cared at all about my actual cancellation? Here's the thing, and here's how you know that the cancellation is not legitimate. The cancellation, when you're canceled, when you are, as we prefer the term, unauthorized, the media does not run a unabridged response from you. After the whole public attack began on him, and it was a very orchestrated, a very organized public attack, Brand was allowed to publish his entire response in the Daily Mail. You could read the whole thing. To be honest, it wasn't very interesting. Frankly, most of the charges against him are pretty much smoke and mirrors, which kind of tends to make me wonder how legitimate the whole exercise is in the first place. Remember, what made Jordan Peterson's name among the right was that interview, which was actually a very softball interview and very much in retrospect looks orchestrated, where he got to bravely stand up and say that he wouldn't use pronouns except, well, he would, but he would use them because he was choosing to, not because he was being forced to. I mean, it was the dumbest thing you can imagine. Why anyone fell for Jordan Peterson after that, I genuinely have no idea. Colin Cutts says, it's a slap on the wrist for not being a complete sellout. You have to actively oppose Clown World to actually get canceled. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think that what is happening to Russell Brand is more of a warning than anything. A warning to him and a warning to others. He has departed from the reservation on a couple issues. But come on, let's be realistic. He is not standing up boldly advocating for Jesus Christ. He's not speaking out against the convergence of the Anglican Church. He's not denouncing the fraud of the Ukraine war. I mean, what he's been doing has been good on with relation to the vax. But really, what is that? That's just self-preservation. Either you took the vax or you didn't take the vax. To his credit, it appears, I don't know because I haven't looked into it, but it appears he didn't. And he spoke out against the pharmaceutical companies and so forth as a result. That's good. Give credit where credit is due. But that doesn't compare to what a lot of more reliable, more courageous, more serious people have done. Everybody had to take a position on the vax. There's no way you could avoid it. But what's Russell Brand's opinion on The Rivers of Blood speech by Enoch Powell? What's his position on Keir Starmer and his attempts to backdoor their way back into the European Union? This is not a serious person. This is not a person who merits any defense on your part. And so it's just absurd. And here's the thing: if somebody is getting 1 billion views on YouTube, I can tell you right now, they're not on our side. And the reason is YouTube is not going to let somebody who's on our side get 1 billion views. Never going to happen. It's just not, it's not possible. You notice that YouTube made their very public act within 3 days of the attack taking place. But ask yourself this: if he's canceled, if he's a rapist, why is he still on YouTube? Why is he still on Twitter? And so, is it a form of attempting to give credit to these people, to give credit to platforms like Rumble that refuse to kick them off or so? Maybe. I don't know. But what it absolutely is, what the purpose is that the Prometheans want to be able to choose their opponents. And they want to choose weak and vulnerable and obviously flawed opponents. Even if Russell Brand is advocating something good, even if he's doing it with effective rhetoric, he's not a serious person. Peter Hitchens brutalized him on a debate concerning drugs. It's true. They chose Crowder, Shapiro, and Peterson, to name a few. Exactly. They want weak and non-serious opposition. I mean, imagine if Razor Fist was permitted the extent of audience reach that Russell Brand is. Razor Fist is a much more intellectually dangerous figure than Russell Brand. He's a much more effective rhetorician than Russell Brand. And remember, they always want to promote people that they can destroy at will. If you haven't read Chuck Dixon's Levon Cade books, you really should consider doing so. They're very violent. They're pretty dark. They're almost pure action novels. But there's a depth to them that you don't find in the old, Mac Bolan executioner novels or the James Bond novels and that sort of thing. And one of the key things about it, remember, Chuck always likes writing from the street level. He likes dealing with small level action things. But what he really does a masterful job in these books of illustrating the total unimportance of the street level battles, and the way that even a massively effective actor like Levon Cade can only do so much. He can only be so effective because the rot goes deep and the rot goes high. In fact, the higher you get, the more awful the rot is, the worse it is. The less it's about human flaws and more about human evil and malice. You know, that's a good point from Sam. The talking heads learned their lesson from Ann Coulter and later Milo. Don't pick smarter opponents. Exactly. So yeah, that's why you're going to see characters continue to come forward. I mean, we saw on the music side, we saw Oliver Anthony being rapidly elevated. Then suddenly it's, oh, we have to save Russell Brand from the left. But again, both of these characters probably have more in common with our enemies than they do with us. And I'm not saying that because, oh, you're just jealous or whatever. No, it's not the case at all. You know, Russell Brand is a fame whore, who chases third tier women with complete abandon, um, and managed to get himself divorced from an Illuminati whore. I mean, you know, he's a reformed drug addict. Um, this is not a healthy, happy man. He got his leash jerked. But remember, they all wear leashes. The reason that we're unauthorized, the reason that we're not authorized, is because we don't wear leashes. We don't belong to them. Razorfist is a very independent sort. Owen is Owen redefines the term loose cannon. He makes loose cannons nervous. I just say and I write what I think and what I believe. The closest that I come to being controlled by anybody is you guys. I am currently preparing my in-depth analysis and assessment of the U.S., China, Taiwanese invasion war games because you guys wanted me to. I asked for a certain number of subscriptions to justify it and show that there's actual interest in it. And you guys responded, enthusiastically. And frankly, I'm kind of glad you did because I had a very different idea and opinion of the quality of the simulation before I actually dug into it in detail. The media descriptions of it and even the summaries of it provided by the organization that did it really didn't do it justice. I would love to sit down and have the opportunity to pick the brains of one of the designers. I may even be able to do that. If I have the chance to do so, I will. Ironic keyboard says can't. Well, if you're talking about the war game, the simulation analysis, that's what I'm doing. The war game, that's two other things, which I'll get into in a little bit. Or actually, I'll just get into it now because I've pretty much said what I have to say. And let's face it, why should we waste any more time thinking about celebrities anyhow, right? I do have one little thing to show you. I think the Castelli history fans will be pleased to see this. So we are very close to going to print with this. And this is the title page for the landmark Thucydides. And it's going to be great. The reason that it's rather strangely shaped for a title page is because this is a very wide book with very wide margins for the notes. So, yeah, Tamburn, who does our title page art, he just always does a fantastic job. He's actually working on the next two history books right now, and I should be able to show them to you next week. But the book itself is fantastic. The book itself is great, but this is next level. So we have a super chat here from Ides of Apocalypse. Thank you. It says, can't wait for Wargame stream. Would you still consider breakdown on Shattered Sword and Stalin's War? Yes, I would consider that, but it's not particularly timely at the moment. Dan in Georgia says, at some point, China will tell us to stay out of the Taiwan Straits. Oh, I believe so. I believe so. One thing I started doing just to try to stay more up on things is I started reading, I actually started doing two things. Number one, I started brushing up on my Japanese again. Not really because I think it will do any good. I'm too old, and it would take way too much time to learn kanji to actually be able to read the Japanese language newspapers. But I just find that it helps me get in the vibe. You know what I mean? It puts me back in the proper East Asian studies frame of mind. All the whole korewa, sorewa, all that sort of thing. Anyhow, I say that just because for some reason I always feel like I have it, and then just occasionally my brain reverses them. This and that and this. But the other thing that I'm doing is I've added to my regular media site rotation, I've added Japan Today. And I think that's useful because I think that it allows me to see how the U.S. propaganda is being filtered through the Japanese media. Like, it's one thing to read, and it's kind of funny because if you read the Chinese diplomatic releases, you often read part of them in the Japanese papers. So it's very interesting to see what Japan has to say about what China and the US are saying, because of course Japan is an absolutely vital aspect of the US military's position in Asia. If Japan opts out, which it does not look like they'll be able to do, but if Japan does happen to opt out, the U.S. Navy is pretty much taken out of commission, because they need that support to even have any sort of chance. Which, anyhow, in the long term, they don't. Where I was talking today on the blog, or maybe yesterday, about how most wars, and might be interesting to study this sometime, but if you think about it, most wars going back to the Spanish Empire fundamentally relate to who can build more of the relevant military armament. Spain dominated while they could manufacture the most ships. Eventually they were passed up by Britain, and then Britain was dominant because France, for all of its massive power, for all of its huge conscription armies and ability to take on, basically to counterbalance the entire rest of the continent of Europe plus Russia. Despite that, Napoleon couldn't build a navy that was capable of defeating the British Navy. And then when it comes to land war, it's all about who can, produce. Going back to the British colonial era, it's about who can produce the musket, who can produce the Gatling gun, who can produce more tanks. Now we may be at the point where it's really more about who can produce more drones and artillery shells. But industrial war is always about productive industrial capacity. And I always used to wonder why countries would get involved in wars, why they would start wars. They couldn't possibly have any chance of winning. And that's when you start to pay attention to the whole military-industrial complex. When you see the historical patterns, are these patterns that evolve naturally? Are they organic patterns? Or are they patterns reflecting the influence of the same sort of people, or even the same entities, across vast spans of time? We can't know. Not yet. But, if the patterns are inorganic, then we can predict what's going to happen even more easily. Because the same people are doing the same things again and again and again, right? So, who said conspiracy theory wasn't useful? Anyhow, on a more upbeat note, more positive note, I got a couple of the people that were on some of the more obscure projects got in touch with me in response to my announcement about the Divine Right project being canceled. And I'm very pleased to be able to say that we're going to keep two of them moving. We're going to keep two of them open. What we've decided to do is make the initial objectives much more modest. But I'm actually pretty optimistic about both of them. I think that because what I decided to do is you can't do things properly. You can't be certain that things are going to be done properly unless you do them yourself. And so, now obviously I can't do all this stuff, but the people that I'm working with are very, very capable of doing what needs to be done, and I'm able to do, bring more to the table than just, inspiration and oversight. So, what we're planning to do on the game side, because I haven't given that up yet. I haven't, it's still my goal to design a genuinely great computer game. And so what I'm doing now is I'm applying my long held tenet and saying, you know what, we're not going to bother with graphics at all. Not initially. I've always felt that gameplay is the most important thing. And so what we're going to do is we're essentially creating an MMO style PvP game with roguelike graphics, ASCII graphics. So we've already got a lot of the design done, but through not using anything but ASCII graphics, we're going to be able to make a ton more progress and really focus on the artificial intelligence, focus on the gameplay, focus on the action, and see if it works. You know, if people like it, then we can always look at putting putting the graphics on top. I mean, Dwarf Fortress is a great game, and people haven't had much luck in putting graphics on top of that. Mostly, and I've talked to the designer, mostly because of a complete lack of interest on his part. But the thing is that most of the gameplay that we're talking about here, and most of the ideas that I want to incorporate, don't require graphics at all. When I was playing in Alterac Valley years ago, I was usually in a screen that didn't even show, didn't show any of the graphics. The graphics were completely covered by the windows that I needed to see. And that was the best gaming experience I've ever had. Despite the fact that the designers completely failed to take advantage of the sort of gameplay they had, to some extent, inadvertently created. So I want to see how far we can take it if we're actually leaning heavily on genuine player interaction. The one thing that most game developers are absolutely unwilling to do, that most game designers are unwilling to do, is to give one player any power over another player. But we're not trying to do a commercial game. We're not trying to make any money on it. So what we can do is we can focus on the ideal player. It's just like when you're writing a book, you should write a book for the ideal reader. Don't write for the mass market. Don't write to make money. You shouldn't write just for yourself, because if you do, why even bother publishing, right? But you write for your hypothetical ideal reader. And I want to apply that concept to game design. See, here's the thing. We already have the basic design. We've already got a lot of this stuff worked out. I mean, the AI documentation alone is like 60 pages. And so the idea and the ideal is essentially a game that could play itself, but that human players and bots can be interchangeable, but that the bots will be carefully calibrated so that their average performance is that of a slightly substandard human player. And this is very doable because, frankly, if you've ever played Fortnite, or frankly any multiplayer game since 4-player Doom, the average human player is not at all difficult to emulate in a useful way. Fallout 4 is being completely remade into a right-wing game. Great, good luck to them. But what we're doing here is not political at all, except in the senses that, unless you want to assign a political ideology to rival concepts of game design. So, Vampire Survivors is a perfect example of gameplay over graphics. I don't know anything about Vampire Survivors. Let's look it up. Let's try this. If we put in let's try putting in a web page and see if we can do that. URL, YouTube. I don't know if this will work, but we'll see. Okay, search. Vampire. My voice cut out. Is this game like Gauntlet? Huh. Okay. Well, we'll just turn that off. Are you hearing me now? Okay. Yeah, for popping up the video must have caused the audio to my microphone to cut out. Obviously, they've enhanced, they updated this streaming software about 3 weeks ago, so they probably enhanced our user experience. 37 says looks kind of like Robotron. I think, yeah, it's a lot like a 1980s arcade game. In fact, what's interesting about Vampire Survivors is that they effectively did something that I was trying to do back, I don't know, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, with our remake of Castle Wolfenstein, which is still something I'd like to do eventually, but, you know. But it looks to me like what they've done there is that they've focused clearly on the gameplay. Gauntlet's a great game. Robotron's a great game. And there's really very little like that anymore. And the success, the fact that it is being named the best game of 2022, proves again that you don't need to spend 50 million, 100 million, 300 million on graphics. There's a place for expensive graphics in games. But it's not the only way to do games. You know, I mean, some of the games that I still to this day love the most have Apple II level graphics. You know, so anyhow, but I'll let you know more about that. Ironic Keyword said game was mostly made by one guy. I assume that's the case. Most of the best games have been made by one guy. And even games that have huge teams are usually best when one guy is responsible for the vision and everybody just implements it. But, you know, because there's so much money in the game industry now, and there has been for the last, 20 years or so, it's very, very difficult for anybody to have that kind of power to enforce a singular vision. But anyhow, we'll see how it goes. But I am optimistic that what we're doing is at least going to be very, very different than anything that is out there. I won't say it's different from anything that's never been seen, because of course it's actually designed to work off of a specific type of game. But like I said, we're going to take some of the great elements from that game, and instead of shutting them down and preventing players from being able to take them further, we're actually going to provide the players with a structured means of taking advantage of them, and therefore taking the gameplay to new heights. That's the idea. So, but we'll see. We might have a very, very basic thing to show in about a month. If we do, yeah, we'll do a dev stream on it. So let's see what else. That's pretty much it. So have a good weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you at the next one. I'm Vox Day, and this is the Darkstream.